In the heart of the Zyrexian Empire, on a massive throne made of living metal, sat the alien queen. Her throne pulsed with a strange, eerie light as her sharp, glowing cyan eyes scanned the vast star system before her. The view was magnificent, a galaxy she had conquered, world by world, system by system. It had all fallen beneath her power. As the supreme leader of her people, the queen's rule was unchallenged. She sat tall and proud, her long silver hair flowing like the tail of a comet. Her body was covered in shimmering armor that glinted in the darkness of space. Her wings, delicate yet strong, were folded neatly behind her, a mark of her royal status. The queen was calm, but her mind raced with thoughts of her next steps in her endless campaign of conquest. Her generals stood in a line before her, awaiting her command. They were towering creatures, built for war, each one a deadly weapon in its own right. Their bodies were covered in thick exoskeletons, sharp claws, and their faces were hidden behind masks of cold, metallic features. Their loyalty to her was unquestionable, their fear of her absolute. "Report," the queen ordered, her voice like the soft hum of a distant star. It was both powerful and soothing, a voice that could command armies or bring peace in a moment of crisis. One of the generals stepped forward, his posture straight as a rod. His voice was deep and rumbling, the sound of a creature who had seen countless battles and survived them all. "Your Highness, the final human stronghold has fallen. Their cities have been leveled, their fleets destroyed, and their leaders eliminated. The humans no longer pose any threat to us." The queen smiled, her lips curling in satisfaction. She leaned forward in her throne, eyes narrowing as she looked over the reports projected on the giant holographic screen before her. The glowing images of battlefields and shattered human cities flickered in the air, a testimony to her unstoppable might. The alien ships, with their sleek designs and advanced weaponry, had crushed the human defenses effortlessly. The queen had ordered the complete destruction of their armies, their governments, their defenses. "Good," the queen purred, her voice dripping with authority. "Once the humans are dealt with, we can turn our attention to the other systems. The galaxy will be ours to rule. Their pathetic species was always doomed from the start." One of her other generals, a large, fearsome warrior, stepped forward, his claws clicking on the metal floor. He was a skilled strategist, known for his brutal tactics in battle. His face was a mask of cold determination. "Your Highness, there are still a few pockets of human resistance scattered across the galaxy, but they are nothing we cannot crush. The humans may have their warriors, but we are the superior species. None can stand against us." The queen's eyes flicked to the general, her expression showing no emotion. "I know," she said softly, "but we must remain vigilant. There may be more out there than we realize. I've heard rumors of a human warrior unlike any other. He is said to be unstoppable, a force of nature, but he is only one human." The queen laughed, the sound echoing through the throne room. "One human cannot possibly stand against the might of the Zyrexian Empire." Her generals nodded in agreement, but there was a faint unease in the air. The queen had heard the whispers too, tales of a human warrior who had single-handedly defeated entire alien battalions, a fighter who could hold his own against overwhelming odds. Some even said that he could rival the strength of the Zyrexian, though such a claim seemed impossible. "The humans have no true warriors," the queen said confidently, her tone cold and dismissive. "They fight with primitive weapons and tactics, driven by nothing more than desperation. They are no match for us. We have the technology, the strength, and the numbers. The galaxy will kneel before us." The generals remained silent, each of them agreeing with their queen, but the slightest flicker of doubt crossed their minds. Still, they did not dare challenge her. After all, she was the queen, the ruler of all Zyrexians, and her power was unmatched. The galaxy had been brought to its knees at her command, and her empire was growing stronger with every passing day. The queen turned her attention back to the holographic display, her gaze focusing on the final reports from the human worlds. She had heard stories of their so-called warriors, but she dismissed them as nothing more than foolish legends. The humans were weak, their technology inferior, their fighting tactics primitive. There was no possible way they could defeat her or her empire. "Send word to our fleet commanders," the Queen ordered, her voice cold and calculating. "Prepare for the final stages of our conquest. We will not waste any more time on these humans. The time has come to wipe them from the galaxy completely." The generals bowed in unison, their faces blank, but their hearts racing with the energy of battle. They had followed the Queen for years, and they knew she was right. No force in the universe could stop them now. They were the rulers of the stars, and nothing could challenge their dominance. The human resistance was nothing more than a brief inconvenience in the grand plan of their conquest. The Queen's empire would reign supreme. But as the generals filed out of the throne room, the Queen's mind lingered on the rumors. One human warrior. He was nothing more than a fleeting thought in her mind, an insignificant detail in the grand scheme of things. And yet there was something about those stories that unsettled her. She had never been one to entertain doubts, but something about this one human made her curious. The Queen leaned back in her throne, her sharp eyes staring into the vastness of space beyond her. "One human," she muttered to herself. "One human who dares to stand against me. I will show him just how weak his kind truly is." With that thought, she dismissed the rumors. They were just that, rumors, and she, the alien Queen, was invincible. There was no power greater than hers. The galaxy was hers to command, and no mere human could ever threaten that. But deep inside, in the cold recesses of her mind, a small seed of doubt began to grow. A warrior who could challenge her. Perhaps it wasn't just a rumor. Maybe, just maybe, there was something more to this human than she had realized. "No," the Queen said, shaking her head. "I am the Queen, the ruler of this galaxy. Nothing will stop me." She dismissed the thought, but it lingered in the back of her mind like a shadow, growing stronger with each passing moment. And as the days went by, the Queen's confidence remained unshaken, but the shadow of doubt grew ever closer, like a storm on the horizon. The throne room of the alien Queen was as grand as it was intimidating. The walls were made of living metal that pulsed with a deep, blue light, casting strange shadows across the room. The air hummed with an eerie energy, and the floor beneath the Queen's throne was covered in intricate designs, etched into the metal like ancient symbols. The ceiling stretched far above, disappearing into darkness, where faint stars could be seen through the massive windows. The Queen sat on her throne, lost in thought. Her glowing cyan eyes stared at the star map projected in front of her. The galaxy was now in her hands. The human resistance had crumbled under her might, and her empire stretched farther than ever before. All the stars in the sky seemed to bend to her will, every planet within her grasp. Nothing could stand in her way. But even as the Queen savored her triumph, a small voice of doubt echoed in the back of her mind. It was barely a whisper at first, just a passing thought. What if the rumors are true? She thought. What if there really is a human who can fight like no other? The Queen shook her head, dismissing the thought. She was the supreme ruler of the Zyrexian Empire. No mere human, no matter how skilled, could stand against her or her army. The very idea seemed laughable. She had crushed their strongest warriors without breaking a sweat. Her people had advanced technology, unmatched strength, and power that far exceeded anything the humans could dream of. Still, that lingering thought gnawed at her. And then, on that fateful day, it happened. The doors of the throne room slammed open with a deafening crash. The Queen's generals, ever vigilant, instantly raised their weapons, their bodies tense, ready to strike at any intruder. The light from their weapons cast an ominous glow across the room, but as the doors opened fully, the intruder was revealed. A figure stepped into the room, silhouetted by the light streaming in from the hallway. The creature was humanoid, tall and strong, but there was something different about him. This was no ordinary human. The figure wore dark, battle-worn armor, its surface scratched and marked by countless fights. The armor looked as though it had been through many battles, its surface dented and scarred. Despite the damage, it still radiated a powerful aura, as if it had been forged for war. The figure's helmet was the most striking feature. Its red visor glowed like a burning fire, cold and piercing. The queen's eyes narrowed as she studied the figure, the faintest hint of curiosity creeping into her otherwise unshakable composure. She had heard of this human, this warrior, the last knight. They called him. He was said to be unlike any other human, a fighter who had taken down entire battalions of aliens with nothing but his strength and skill. As the figure entered the throne room, the queen's generals tensed even more, but the intruder did not draw his weapon. Instead, he simply stood there, silent and unmoving, his glowing red visor locked on the queen. The queen tilted her head slightly, her voice dripping with amusement. "And who might you be?" she asked, her tone mocking. "A foolish human who believes he can challenge me." The figure did not speak at first. He simply raised one hand, pointing directly at the queen. His posture was firm, unyielding, and his eyes, well, they were hidden behind the visor, but the queen could feel the weight of his gaze. He was not intimidated, not in the slightest. His presence was commanding, and for a split second, the queen felt a flicker of unease, but she quickly dismissed it. "I am the one who will end your reign," the human warrior said, his voice calm but filled with certainty. The queen's eyes widened slightly, a flash of irritation flickering across her face. How dare this human speak to her, the ruler of the galaxy, with such boldness? The room grew tense. Her generals' weapons were still raised, but they were unsure. They had never faced a human like this before. "You believe you can defeat me?" the queen asked, her voice low and dangerous. "You, a mere human. You have no idea what you're up against." The warrior did not respond. He simply stood there, unmoving, his grip tightening on the hilt of his massive sword. The sword was unlike anything the queen had seen before. Its blade glowed with an unnatural energy, pulsing with power, almost as if it were alive. She could feel its energy crackling in the air, a force that seemed to rival the most advanced weapons in her arsenal. The queen felt a wave of anger rise within her. "Enough of this foolishness," she hissed, her voice laced with fury. "You are nothing, a speck of dust before me. I am the queen of the Zyrexians. I have crushed civilizations and eradicated entire species. You will fall like the rest." But as she spoke, something strange happened. The human warrior raised his sword, and in one smooth motion, he swung it toward her generals. The blade moved so fast that the queen could barely track it with her eyes. In an instant, one of her most trusted generals was cut in half, his body falling to the ground in 2 pieces. The remaining generals gasped in shock, their eyes wide with disbelief. "Impossible," one of them hissed. "How could he?" Before the general could finish, the human warrior was already moving again. His sword swung in a wide arc, cutting through another alien with ease. The alien's body dropped to the floor, its exoskeleton shattered, its glowing eyes fading into darkness. The queen's eyes widened in shock. She had never seen anything like this before. "No," she whispered, her voice trembling for the first time in years. "This is not possible." But the human warrior wasn't done. He moved with a speed and precision that seemed unnatural. His every movement was calculated, his strikes devastating. Within moments, he had taken down half of the queen's elite guard. They tried to fight back, but they were no match for him. His strength, his speed, his skill, all combined to make him an unstoppable force. The remaining generals tried to regroup, but it was clear that they were outmatched. The queen stood frozen, unable to believe what she was witnessing. She had seen her empire crush entire civilizations without breaking a sweat, and now, this one human was tearing through her forces like they were nothing. Her mind raced. How is this possible? How can one human be so strong? For the first time in her life, the queen felt something she had never experienced before. Fear. It was faint, but it was there. The fear of losing. The fear of being defeated by a species she had long considered inferior. The human warrior's eyes, though hidden behind his visor, seemed to burn with an intensity that could melt stars. He had come here for one purpose: to challenge the queen's reign, to bring an end to her empire. And from the looks of it, he was succeeding. The queen's mind snapped into action. She could not allow this human to defeat her. She could not allow her empire to fall. She was the queen. She was invincible. And yet, deep down, a small voice whispered the truth. This human is unlike any other. I will not fall, the queen growled, her voice regaining its strength. I am the queen of the Zyrexians, and I will destroy you. With a roar, the queen activated her personal weapon, a massive energy blade that crackled with raw power. Her wings unfurled, and she launched herself into the air, her eyes blazing with fury. This human may have been powerful, but he had underestimated the true strength of the Zyrexian queen. She was no mere alien. She was a force of nature, and she would not be defeated by a single human warrior. But even as she prepared to engage in battle, the doubt from earlier began to creep back into her mind. What if this warrior truly was different? What if this was the one enemy she couldn't crush? The thought lingered in her mind as she charged toward him, ready to show him just how powerful the queen of the Zyrexians truly was. The throne room shook as the queen launched herself into the air, her wings unfurled wide, casting a shadow that stretched across the room. The massive energy blade in her hand crackled with power, the air around it humming as if it were alive, ready to unleash destruction. The room was silent for a brief moment, an eerie stillness that made the tension almost unbearable. The human warrior stood in the center of the room, calm and unmoving. His glowing red visor reflected the queen's approach, but he did not flinch. His hand gripped the hilt of his own weapon, the massive energy sword, and his stance was solid, like a mountain, unmoving and ready. He had faced countless enemies before, but this was different. This was the queen, the ruler of the Zyrexian Empire, a being of unimaginable power. And yet, he did not hesitate. He had come here with one goal: to stop her reign. The queen was a blur as she dove toward him, her energy blade raised high, aiming for his chest. The room seemed to warp around her, the power of her wings and the energy blade creating a wind so strong that it ripped through the air, sending pieces of debris flying in every direction. The human stood firm, his eyes hidden behind the visor, but his body moving with a fluid grace. As the queen's blade came down, he twisted to the side, narrowly avoiding the devastating strike. The queen hissed in frustration, her eyes narrowing, as she quickly recovered from the missed strike. "You're fast," she growled, her voice cold and full of venom. "But speed won't save you." With a flick of her wrist, she sent a flurry of energy blasts from her blade, each one crackling through the air like lightning. The human didn't flinch. He was already moving, his body shifting and twisting in ways that seemed impossible, dodging and weaving between the blasts with precision. His energy sword swung in wide arcs, cutting through the blasts as if they were nothing more than air. His movements were calculated, controlled, and as he moved, he closed the distance between them, inch by inch. "You have no idea what you're facing," the queen spat, her voice filled with anger. "I have destroyed entire worlds. I have defeated species far stronger than you. You are nothing." But the human warrior did not respond. He simply moved, his eyes focused, his mind sharp, and his body working in perfect harmony with his weapon. He was not just fighting with strength, he was fighting with purpose. He wasn't just trying to survive, he was trying to win. The queen charged again, her blade crackling with energy as she swung it down toward the human's head. But once again, he was faster. He ducked under her swing, and in the same motion, swung his sword toward her. The blade clashed against her armor with a loud, resonating sound, sending sparks flying. The queen staggered back, surprised by the force of the blow, but she quickly regained her balance, her eyes flashing with fury. "You think you can defeat me with mere swordplay?" she hissed, her wings flapping once again, sending a shockwave through the room. "I am the queen. I am invincible." She raised her blade high, preparing to strike again, but the human warrior did something unexpected. Instead of retreating or dodging, he closed the distance between them in a blur of movement, his sword raised in a final devastating swing. The queen's eyes widened in shock. "No!" she shouted as she raised her own blade to block the incoming strike. The blades met with a thunderous clash, the force of the collision shaking the room. The queen's powerful energy blade vibrated in her hands as it locked against the human's sword. She pushed against him with all her strength, but the human did not back down. He held his ground, his muscles straining as he fought against her immense power. For a moment, it seemed like a stalemate, two warriors locked in a deadly dance, each trying to overpower the other. But then the queen felt it. A shift. It was small at first, just a flicker of doubt. The human sword was not just strong, it was precise. It was cutting through her defense, slowly but surely, wearing her down. She had underestimated him. She had thought him just another human warrior, someone who could be crushed easily beneath her boot. But this one was different. This one was more than just a fighter. This one had something she couldn't quite understand, something she hadn't seen in any other human before. For the first time in her long life, the queen felt the terrifying grip of doubt. How can he be so strong? She thought, her mind racing as she struggled to hold her ground. But the human was relentless. With a sudden burst of strength, he pushed her back, breaking the deadlock. The queen's wings flared wide, and she spun in the air, narrowly avoiding the next strike. She wasn't used to being pushed like this. She had always been the one in control, the one who held the power. But now, she found herself fighting harder than ever before, her movements more desperate as the human pressed the attack. "You are nothing," the queen hissed, her voice filled with rage. "You are just one human. You can't win." But the warrior didn't answer. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder than any words ever could. With every movement, he closed the gap between them. Every swing of his sword brought him closer to victory. He wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for something greater, for the future of the humans, for the freedom of those who had been oppressed by the queen's empire. He was fighting for justice. The queen's mind raced as she struggled to keep up with his speed. She had underestimated him. She had thought that the strength of the Zyrexians would be enough to crush anything in its path, but this human was breaking her expectations, one strike at a time. In a blur of motion, the human warrior ducked beneath her swing and delivered a powerful uppercut with his blade. The queen staggered back, her wings flapping wildly to regain her balance. She could feel the impact reverberating through her armor. She had never been hit like this before. She was used to being the one who struck fear into her enemies, the one who controlled the battlefield. But now, for the first time, she felt vulnerable. "No," the queen growled, shaking her head as she tried to steady herself. "I will not lose to a mere human." With a screech of rage, the queen gathered all her strength and flew forward again, her energy blade aimed directly at the human's chest. She moved faster than ever before, her wings cutting through the air like a knife. But the human was already moving, his sword held high as he prepared to meet her head-on. The two warriors collided with a deafening crash, the sound of metal against metal ringing through the throne room. The human sword met the queen's blade in midair, and for a brief moment, time seemed to stand still. The queen's eyes locked with the human's visor, and for the first time, she saw something she had never expected: resolve. There was no fear in his eyes, no hesitation. He was not just a warrior. He was a symbol of defiance, a challenge to everything she had built. And in that moment, the queen realized the truth. This human was no ordinary fighter. He was something more. He was the challenge she had never anticipated, the enemy she had never prepared for. And now, for the first time in her life, the queen understood that she might not be as invincible as she had once believed. The battle raged on, but deep inside, a small seed of doubt had taken root in her mind. The queen's mind raced as she hovered in the air, eyes locked onto the human warrior. His presence, unwavering and determined, sent a chill down her spine. For the first time in years, the queen was not sure of herself. She had always been the one in control. She had always been the one who commanded armies, who crushed her enemies with ease. But this human, this warrior, he was different, and that difference sparked a fear she had never known. The throne room was still. For a moment, it felt as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The air crackled with tension as the two warriors stared each other down, both waiting for the other to make the next move. The queen's energy blade hummed with power, while the human sword pulsed with an unnatural energy, a weapon forged for battle, ready to strike. "You've made a mistake coming here," the queen said, her voice cold but laced with a hint of uncertainty. "You are outmatched. I am the queen of the Zyrexian Empire. I control the stars themselves." The human warrior didn't flinch. His posture remained steady, and his visor glowed with an eerie light. He had come here for one reason: to end her reign. And he would not be intimidated by words, no matter how powerful they sounded. "Your reign ends today," he said simply, his voice calm, almost tranquil. With those words, the fight began. The queen, her wings beating furiously, charged forward, her energy blade cutting through the air with a speed and power that could shatter entire mountains. She aimed for the warrior's chest, hoping to finish this quickly, to prove that no human could challenge her. But the human moved with a fluid grace, dodging her strike by inches, his body twisting and turning with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. He didn't wait for her to recover. In a flash, he was on the offensive, his sword slicing through the air in wide, powerful arcs. The queen's eyes widened in surprise as she barely managed to block the first strike. The force of his sword sent a shockwave through her arms, causing her to stagger back. For a brief moment, she had felt the power in his blow, and it had made her realize just how dangerous he was. "You're fast," the queen spat, shaking off the shock. "But speed won't save you." She lunged at him again, her blade crackling with energy, a deadly arc aimed directly at his head. But once again, the human warrior was quicker. He ducked low, his body moving with such speed that it seemed as though he had anticipated her every move. With a swift motion, the human brought his sword up in an upward strike, aiming for the queen's exposed side. The queen reacted quickly, raising her blade just in time to block the strike, but the force of the collision was immense. Her feet slid across the metal floor, and she was momentarily thrown off balance. She gritted her teeth, refusing to show weakness. "Is that all you have?" The queen sneered, her wings flapping again as she steadied herself. "You may be fast, but you're still just a human. You will fall before me." The human did not respond with words. Instead, he charged forward again, his eyes locked on hers. With each strike, his movements became more fluid, more precise. It was as if his body and his sword were one, moving in perfect harmony. The queen could feel the intensity of each blow, each strike hitting harder than the last. She had underestimated him, and now she was paying the price. The queen spread her wings wide, flapping them hard to create a gust of wind that sent debris scattering across the room. She used the distraction to fly high into the air, out of the reach of the human warrior. The human looked up, but he did not hesitate. He followed her movements with his eyes, and without a second thought, he leaped into the air after her, his sword raised and ready. The queen's eyes flashed with fury. "You dare follow me?" she roared. With a flick of her wrist, she unleashed a barrage of energy blasts from her blade, each one tearing through the air with incredible speed. The human warrior, still mid-air, expertly dodged the blasts, his body twisting and turning with acrobatic skill. He was not just reacting. He was anticipating her every move, predicting her attacks before they even happened. The queen's frustration began to grow. No matter what she did, this human warrior seemed to be one step ahead. She had been told that humans were weak, that they were nothing compared to the Zyrexian race, and yet here he was, defying all her expectations, pushing her to her limits. "You're stronger than I thought," the queen muttered, her voice filled with disbelief. "But even if you can dodge my attacks, you can never defeat me." She folded her wings and dove toward the human, her blade extended forward. The force of her descent was so powerful that the air around her crackled with energy, and the ground beneath her feet began to crack and tremble. She aimed directly for the human's chest, ready to end this once and for all. But the human warrior was not intimidated. He raised his sword high, his body tensing, and with a single, powerful motion, he swung it downward, aiming for the queen's energy blade. The clash of their weapons sent a shockwave through the room, rattling the walls and shaking the floor beneath them. The sound of metal striking metal was deafening, but the human did not falter. He pushed against her with all his strength, his sword locked against hers in a fierce struggle. For a moment, it seemed like a deadlock, two powerful warriors locked in a battle of wills, each trying to overpower the other. The queen's wings flapped wildly as she fought to maintain her position, but the human warrior was not giving an inch. His eyes burned with determination, and his sword, though heavy, moved with the speed and precision of a blade far lighter. The queen could feel his strength, and for the first time, she felt the grip of doubt tighten around her heart. "You won't win," the queen hissed, her voice low and threatening. "I am the queen of the Zyrexian Empire. I cannot be defeated." But the human warrior did not respond. He simply focused on his sword, his every muscle working in perfect harmony. He pushed harder, his strength more than a match for the queen's. Slowly but surely, he began to overpower her. The queen's eyes widened in disbelief as she felt her energy blade start to crack, the metal beginning to bend under the pressure of the human strike. In a final, desperate move, the queen flapped her wings with all her might, propelling herself backward and away from the human. She landed on the far side of the room, breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling with each labored breath. Her energy blade hummed quietly in her hand, its power slowly waning after the intense clash. The human warrior, too, stood still for a moment, his sword still raised and his body tense. He had not been able to end the fight just yet, but he had pushed the queen back. For the first time, she had been forced to retreat. "You're stronger than I expected," the queen said, her voice now filled with grudging respect. "But you still don't understand. You can't defeat me." But the human did not respond. His visor hid his eyes, but the queen could feel the weight of his gaze. He was not done. The fight was far from over, and as she stared at him, she realized that he would not stop until he had achieved his goal. He had come here for one purpose, to end her reign. The queen, despite herself, felt a flicker of admiration for the warrior before her, but that was quickly replaced by her overwhelming desire to win. She could not, and would not, let this human defeat her. With a growl of frustration, she raised her energy blade once more, ready to continue the fight. The battle had only just begun. The queen hovered in the air, her eyes locked onto the human warrior. Her wings flapped slowly, stirring the air as she tried to steady herself after their intense clash. Her energy blade still crackled with power, but the hum of it now sounded different, less certain, more strained. The queen had never felt anything like this before. For the first time in her life, she wasn't entirely sure of herself. She, the mighty queen of the Zyrexian Empire, the ruler of countless worlds, had never faced an enemy who could make her question her power. Yet here stood a human warrior who had done exactly that. The room was silent except for the distant hum of her blade and the quiet breathing of the two combatants. The human warrior, his armor scratched and battered from the fight, stood just a few meters away, his energy sword still raised. He was tired, but his stance was strong, his eyes never leaving her for a second. There was no fear in those eyes, only determination, a will to succeed that was as unyielding as steel. "You're stronger than I thought," the queen admitted, her voice cold but tinged with something like respect. It was a strange feeling. She had never needed anyone's approval before. She had always been the one people feared, the one they bowed to. But this human warrior was different. He didn't fear her, and that unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. The human warrior did not respond. His visor gleamed, a silent challenge that spoke louder than any words could. He had not come here for respect, for admiration. He had come here to end her reign, to free his people from the tyranny of the Zyrexian Empire. And he would not stop until he had succeeded. The queen's mind raced. She could still feel the burn in her muscles from their battle, the weight of her blade in her hand. She had been able to overwhelm countless enemies with ease, but this warrior, he was different. He was fast, strong, and relentless. He had the strength of a warrior, but it was more than that. There was something in his eyes, something that made her question her certainty, something that made her wonder if maybe, just maybe, she could lose. "You can't defeat me," she hissed through clenched teeth, trying to push the doubt from her mind. "I am the queen. You are nothing compared to me." But even as she spoke those words, she felt the doubt creep in once again. Her hands shook slightly, and she gripped her blade tighter, trying to steady herself. The human warrior had pushed her further than anyone had before. Every strike had been calculated, every move designed to challenge her, to test her. He wasn't just fighting for victory. He was fighting to break her, to show her that her power was not absolute, that even she could be defeated. The queen tried to shake off the feeling. She had fought and conquered for so long that the thought of losing was foreign to her. She had crushed entire civilizations beneath her heel, had wiped out species that dared challenge her. She was the queen. She was invincible. "I am invincible," she whispered under her breath, as if repeating it could make it true. But the human warrior was still there, still standing, still watching her with that cold, unwavering gaze. "I won't stop," he said finally, his voice calm but filled with unshakable resolve. "I won't stop until you're defeated. Your reign ends now." His words sent a jolt through her. The queen's heart raced, her mind spinning. How could a single human make her feel like this? How could anyone challenge her so fiercely and so relentlessly? The doubt she had been trying to push down started to rise again, threatening to overwhelm her. "You think you can stop me?" the queen asked, her voice rising. "You are nothing. You have no idea what you are up against." But as she spoke, she felt a shift deep inside her. For the first time, she wasn't just angry. She was afraid. Afraid that this human warrior might actually succeed in doing what no one had ever been able to do. Defeat her. The human warrior stepped forward, his eyes focused and steady. His blade was still raised, ready to strike. "I don't fear you," he said, "and neither do the people you've hurt. They've had enough of your reign. It ends today." The queen's breath caught in her throat. The people she ruled over, she had never cared about them. They were pawns in her game, tools to be used for her own gain. But now, as the human spoke, something inside her stirred. She had ruled for so long, commanded so much power, that she had forgotten what it meant to be challenged, forgotten what it meant to have something worth fighting for. The human wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for everyone who had suffered under her rule. The thought gnawed at her, unsettled her more than anything else had during their battle. "You fight for them," the queen murmured, more to herself than to him. "You fight for those I've crushed. But what will they do once you're gone? What will they do without a ruler, without someone to keep them in check?" The warrior's response was quick and simple. "They'll fight for themselves." His words stung. The queen tried to push away the feelings that were rising in her chest. She was the queen. She was untouchable. But as the human spoke, she realized that the very foundation of her empire, the belief that she could never be defeated, was beginning to crumble. "You can't defeat me," the queen repeated, but her voice was less certain now. "You will fall before me. All of you will fall." But even as she said those words, the human warrior didn't flinch. He simply raised his sword, preparing for whatever came next. There was no fear in him. He wasn't just a fighter. He was a symbol of defiance, a symbol of hope for the oppressed. And that realization struck the queen like a thunderclap. She had built her empire on fear. She had ruled with an iron fist, crushing all who dared to defy her. But this human warrior was different. He didn't fear her. He didn't need her. And that scared her more than any weapon, more than any army. The queen's mind spun, trying to find a way to regain control of the situation. She had always been the one in charge. She had always been the one who commanded others, the one who struck fear into the hearts of those who opposed her. But now, for the first time, she was the one who was unsure. She was the one who was afraid. "You won't win," the queen said again, but this time, there was no conviction in her voice. "I will never fall to you." The human warrior stepped forward once more, his sword raised, his eyes never leaving her. "We'll see about that." The queen's mind raced. She had no more words left to say. Her confidence had shattered, her belief in her invincibility beginning to crumble. And for the first time, she realized that there was something more powerful than her empire, more powerful than her weapons, more powerful than her throne. It was hope.